The goal of today's discussion is really just, it's an introduction of what potential revenue measures the city council may consider. It's a focus on the general fund and the health of the general fund. This is the city's largest fund and most discretionary fund. I always remind my staff our mission is to protect the general fund, make sure that we follow budget and try to get every legal penny we can and protect it, make sure it falls under the approval of council. This fund covers a lot of essential services, police, fire, streets, parks, and general government, debt service, and other capital needs, many capital needs, as we kind of just touched on right now. Another goal is to just determine if council desires to begin the process to develop a revenue measure. Again, this is just discussion. Staff doesn't come in here with a lean one way or another. I'm here to provide information. And then for council to provide any input regarding a revenue measure, we're going to go through what many options are for council to consider, and some that voters could consider potentially. So this is a little picture of me carrying around an elephant that's been in the room. But anyways, it's right now. But again, the general fund has many demands. Sitting right behind me is a police chief and a captain, so I don't want to say too much, but we'll highlight them a little bit more later. But again, streets, fire, police, essential services that the city must provide is covered by the general fund. An economic downturn is overdue. It's been good economically overall for the city for many years, but it is predicted by economists. They say if not, it's not a matter of if, just when it'll happen. Still hasn't happened yet, but that's what they say. Balanced budget. It was tough this last 2-year cycle. There were deferred needs. There was not a lot of flexibility in the general fund for city council to add on additional services, improvements, because a lot of ideas, a lot of needs, a lot of wants require the dollar to back it up. In several meetings ago now, council directed staff to look at options, and so here we are today. So just a quick highlight on the general fund. Reserves have been diminished. Last fiscal year's audit, the general fund reserve was approximately 6%. City council has an established goal of 35%. This was knocked down primarily because of settlement that the city agreed to earlier this calendar year. There's ongoing annual revenue and costs. So revenues have been going up, but so have costs. And because of that, led to a lot of the challenges that we saw at budget time, and why the having a balanced budget was a challenge. Especially in year 2, due to lack of funds, there were many deferred needs, capital needs. As we saw in the capital improvement program, there's well over $60 million at least that could be considered by council. There's probably a lot more, maybe some that could be taken off, probably some that could be put on. So that's just kind of a ballpark figure that we could use for planning purposes at least. Of that $60 million, we were only able to fund the projects that were grant funded. So this is some information. A lot of information was gathered from the Institute for Local Government, which is referenced on the bottom there. But this is an example of what a typical full-service city in the state of California looks like as far as general fund revenues and expenditures. So you'll see property tax, sales and use tax. Those are typically your big items. Franchise fees, utility users tax. And I have a little circle there that says, Hanford does not have. We don't have that. business license tax, and hotel tax, or transient occupancy tax. We call it TOT for short. And then how most cities will spend their money. So the reason why I was hesitant to say anything good or bad, or I only say good things about police, but typically cities do spend a lot on their police departments, and that's what we can see here. So fire, police, parks and recreation, library. We don't have that. The county does that. Streets, planning, and then other. City manager's office, my office probably fall under the other. So here we've attempted to show, what does the city of Hanford look like? So we tried to use the green, just the green tone for money. I think that's why they used it. So here
Chris,
we're showing.
I'm sorry. Can you go back just real quick? So if you take a look there, if that's proportional, you'll see that property tax is kind of the major funding that the average city does. If you look at ours, because we're a smaller city and not built out, our property tax revenue is actually less than our sales tax revenue. And which is, with the growth we have going on, that's a good thing. But we have a lot of housing that's under Prop 13, which haven't been reassessed. And so overall, our property tax base is less. And we've had those conversations before where you'll hear folks say, what are my property taxes paid for? And I think, our property tax revenue isn't even enough to fund our fire department.
Yep. Thank you, Mario. That highlights a lot on the property tax side, because as you can see, their property tax usually is a stronger portion for a typical city. It's not so much here. And part of that is because the economy of the city has grown over the last decade or so, and so sales tax is stronger. But there's catch-up opportunity, I'll say, on the property tax side. Sales tax, in this figure, the cannabis tax is included in there. That is part of their general fund revenues. So that goes towards providing the services for fire, police, parks and rec, and the others. Actually, I'll move on to the next one. This is the city of Hanford, the discretionary spending according to the most recent budget year, the budget year that we're in now. This is how city council has budgeted the spending for the general fund. So police is a primary component of that, along with fire, then parks and community services, engineering and streets, community development, and then admin. And then a tiny little bit of general fund, so that's some debt that goes overall to the overall city. And in all of these, this is a spread of $43.6 million. However, in the revenues, this does not show allocations from other funds. This is from outside funds. So going into what are some options for the city? This is a little tidbit from the Institute for Local Government, but it highlights here. I guess it doesn't pinpoint very well, but the city or county with majority voter approval can consider a tax a general tax, a parcel or special tax, a general obligation bond, a fee, fine, or rent. I have a little excerpt there. A fee may not exceed the estimated reasonable cost of providing the particular service or product for which the fee is charged, plus overhead. So, the thought may come up, well, let's just increase fees, but there's a limit to that. You can't exceed what the reasonable cost is. So just going into what are some typical options for a city to consider. So business tax, a business license tax, we call it business license here, but business license tax, it is technically a tax. Hanford does have one. Most cities and few counties do have a business license tax. This does add burden to business, but the city does have one of these. And it does bring in some revenue. Look right in. It brings in about 1.9% for the city. So it is a small factor, but it does bring in some. Transient occupancy tax, the TOT. Hanford's at 8%. Most cities do have this, and in a chart coming up here, you'll see that all of our surrounding cities have one, and we're probably around lower to mid-pack on that. But the burden lies on the visitors. So I want to get a hotel in Hanford, and I'll pay that tax. So it's not necessarily the hotel paying it, it's the visitor coming in paying that tax on the room that they're renting. Utility user tax. Hanford does not have one of these. Many cities have this. Notice the wording there. Many cities have this, not most. But this is a revenue that a lot of cities throughout the state do have. It does put burden on residents and businesses. But what this does is it would add a tax to electricity, gas, water, telephone, sanitation, and cable television. A similar comparison for us could be like our franchise fees, but this would be a utility user tax. So added onto that bill, typically the utility companies collect that and then remit that to the cities. Parcel tax, Hanford does not have one, at least citywide, but this does provide a burden on the property owner. And typically, this is not, as I conducted research on this component, not a lot of cities have this. It is an option, it's a tool, but as a citywide measure, I didn't find a lot of cities that did have this. And it does provide less than 1% of city revenue statewide. So then finally, a district transaction and use tax, sales tax. The state has fancier wording, but for short, I'll call it sales tax. Hanford has none. It's at the statewide rate of 7.25%, and 1% of that goes to the city. And this chart just highlights there, again, what is the requirement for a general tax and special tax. But I have there on the side, the primary differences are a special revenue measure or special measure would require 2/3 vote, and it proposes the funds may be used for locked scope. So whatever the voters approve, that's what it will be spent on. Typically, staff has seen this for specific to public safety or maybe a transportation-related measure, but then it's only used for that particular purpose that was approved by the voters. A general measure requires a 50% plus one vote. It is the most flexible, and the agency, the city, must comply with what the voters approved. So what did the ballot measure ask for? But then it does leave it to the city council's discretion as to how they would use it. But a lot of times cities will develop advisory committees or oversight committees to help oversee that and provide recommendations to city council. So that's another tool there. In this case, the burden is on a wider area within and outside the city. So as visitors come in, they'll have that burden as well as residents within the city. Here just takes a look at a comparison as to what do our neighbors have. I didn't include a bigger city like Fresno. They have many add-ons, but I tried to take a look at similar sized cities and surrounding agencies. So you'll see City of Hanford and City of Lemoore sit, I'll say, on top with the 7.25% sales tax. Utility user tax, we have none. Transient tax, we have 8%. And the city parcel tax, none. So just starting from the right back, city parcel tax, I found no cities had a citywide parcel tax. Transient tax, we're about in the middle. On the bottom there is an average number, so average is 9%, we're at 8%. Utility user tax average there is 3%, but you see there the utility user tax, if you may recall, it said many cities, not most cities. So that kind of comes true when you look at our neighbors. Many cities have it, but not most. So utility user tax, like Visalia does not have one, but Tulare does. So it's just kind of a hit and miss there. And then the total sales tax. So there, the county base is 7.25 for Kings County, but then if you go outside that, most counties have an additional sales tax, district tax. And then there's a local percentage there. So the average local sales tax percentage is 0.75%, and we're at 0. The top one is City of Porterville. They get first place with 1.5%. So this we intend to cover just what are primary revenue measure options. Primarily, cities will look at a special revenue measure or a general revenue sales tax measure. And again, the primary argument for a special revenue measure is the spending plan is restricted in the future by terms of the measure. It will continue to reflect the will of the voters for which the measure was adopted. The main argument typically against it is getting 2/3 of approval from the voters can be very difficult, and future expenditures are unable to evolve with needs over time. They're restricted to meeting future changing needs. General sales tax measure does only require 50% plus one approval. Spending plan can be changed in the future without restriction to meet changing needs. It's common to include, as I mentioned, rigorous voter input, such as an advisory committee or oversight committee or whatever a city may call it. And then a utility user tax. So collecting utility user taxes comes from the customers. And as I mentioned, this would be collected typically by the utility companies and then remitted to the city. So what would it look like if no additional funding to the general fund came? And there's an image there of, well, we just basically be passing money back and forth. So if there's a need over in police, then we can take it from fire. But then if fire needs it, then we can take it from parks. Or we could do that type of game. There'd be no expansion to existing services potentially, or very slow expansion of city services just based on what funding is available to the city. Could mean reducing or cutting services in order to allow for expansion elsewhere. We could cut the finance department in half and create more room in the fire department or something like that. That's a bad example, very, very bad example, but just an example. We could defer vehicle and equipment replacements, but at some point you just got to have those in order to do your work and for the city to conduct business. Facility maintenance, at some point it's just unavoidable. It becomes a dangerous and a liability issue. So there's certain costs that just, despite any effort by anybody, will eventually happen. Just could be a matter of time. Reductions could be police officers only respond to a predetermined level of calls, so the service levels could drop, and that's just an example, so it could just be everywhere. Maybe a parks worker won't respond to a request within a month or instead of a week or something like that. Minimal road maintenance. The city is already challenged at what levels of road funding is available. Primarily, it pays for its road maintenance and road projects through grants or transportation-only funding. Adding general fund money is not in the city's best interest right now. And then this could also mean just reduction in park maintenance. I know there's concerns there. Some may say, oh, it's already reduced. Well, it could be reduced further. Just overall, I think the point I'm trying to get across is customer service levels could go down or just not be where city council or the city really wants them to be or needs them to be. And then the question ultimately becomes, what level of quality of life versus the cost does the community desire? So additional general fund revenue. So a revenue measure would increase discretionary tax revenue to fund the services that I've mentioned previously. And this kind of just summarizes what we're talking about. And to point out also, this does not pay for enterprise fund costs. So water, sewer, sanitation, those and refuse, those are funded outside of this discussion. And we're actually later tonight looking at a rate study for council to consider to go to the Prop 218 notice. So that's a whole separate discussion. This is just focused on the general fund. The city has constrained spending considerably already, as council may recall in the approved budget. And we currently have a 2-year budget. So we have a balanced budget that was done. It was challenging. We deferred some needs, but it's done. Budget improvements were made, meaning staff cut costs as much as possible without starting to really drop levels of service. We made more optimistic projections in revenues. We made some optimistic projections in some salary budget, as we highlighted in the budget process. So staff really believes it's a pretty tight budget, not as optimistic approach as prior years. And deferred needs had been done and assessed. So we weren't fully able to recommend, and council wasn't able to approve full allocation of vehicle needs across the city in regards to the general fund. It was still able to set aside money for public safety vehicle needs, but not anything else. So all of these things are going to start adding up. And then, as we saw in the capital improvement program, unable to fund any general fund projects outside of grant-funded projects could be challenging for the city in the future. So here we deferred, we penny pinched, we have balanced budget. So looking at the TOT, these next several slides are just to give an idea of what revenue measures may bring to the city. And these are our best estimates at this time. But at least for discussion purposes, they're good to go by. So an additional 1% for the transient occupancy tax, which is currently at 8%, would bring about 90,000. Let's round up to 100,000. But another 4% would bring 360,000 to the city. I used 4% here to bring us up to 12%, which is about the max of what some of our neighbors are at. Utility user tax. Reminder here, the city of Hanford does not have one. If we just go up by percentage, it's about 700,000 per percent on utility user tax. This could vary depending on what. This is probably a very conservative number because staff does not have access to all the information on utilities currently. So if this option were to be looked at anymore, these numbers could change, but staff believes that these are good, at least planning discussion level numbers. But going up to 7%, which was on the upper spectrum of the table previously, could bring just under $5 million. Then sales tax revenue in 0.25% increments, max up to 2%. That would be the max allowed. But based on July 2023 estimates from our sales tax audit consultant, the estimates come in at just under $5 million for 0.25%, and then it goes up from there. So at 2%, we could be looking at over 38 million potentially a year. So just a quick look at city near-term and long-term needs. So touched on at the very beginning of the discussion, but the cost could vary widely here, right? So we could say we only need this, but then we can go up to very high, saying it just depends on what city council would say the needs truly are. But to kind of help bring some into perspective, police, if we brought in officers, we're looking at around $250,000 per officer, and that's also including a vehicle, and then all their salary and benefits, and that's top pay. And then $100,000 for non-safety staff. Fire, you're looking at about $130,000 for one firefighter and $1.2 million for an engine. Streets, we're looking at a need there of a minimum $4.5 million annually to increase and maintain the street maintenance index, to bring it to non-failing index standards. And then parks, this could vary greatly. If you talk to me, I'll probably give you one number. If you talk to Director Brad, he may give you another number. If you talk tomorrow, he may come in the middle.
Well, and if we can just kind of add some context to this, I think Captain Anderson and Chief Amoroso would say that conservatively, to meet the 1.5 per 1,000 ratio that's out there, we could add 20 officers on the police force immediately. So annually, you're looking at $3 to $4 million a year, more in the first year when you add the vehicles and whatnot. We know that to meet our build out, we need 2 new fire stations. So that's about 1.2 to 1.3 million per 9-member crew. So you've got another 2.5 million. You've got the 4.5 million there. We're at $10 million already just for staff to staff our needs today, and that's not counting in the future. Through impact fees, through this plan, should council give us direction to pursue this, the other thing you would need to do is put money aside. We've just received a proposal for needs assessment on the public safety building. We thought when we brought council the deferred capital program, it was about $30 million. At ICSC, I had an opportunity to talk to the folks from Los Baños. They just opened a station. They paid $26 million for it. It was a design build and a tilt-up building. So we think now we're in the neighborhood of $40 to $50 million for our public safety building. They don't go up, they don't double, but that's something we're looking at. We know fire stations are going to cost, anywhere from $6 to $10 million per station. So that would require a spending plan that takes a look at what anticipated revenues are based on whatever direction council may choose to give us. Is it a blend of sales tax and utility users tax? Is the transient occupancy tax? If you go back to the list of all those other cities, many of them have a built-in number of methods to have them meet their needs. The other thing that's important is when you look at the county base number, both Tulare and Fresno County have county-wide sales tax measures that are specific to transportation. So that 4.5 that we're looking to have to fund ourselves for our streets in Tulare County, they give money to their cities in their county to fund streets, to fund traffic improvements, to fund bicycle and pedestrian trails. And so they have that funding source that folks are paying that get allocated to those cities based on their spending plan. Fresno has the same thing. And so that's why the county base percentage is higher. And those residents pay that, but that revenue also comes to the cities to fund a lot of their infrastructure.
So yeah, thank you, Mara. You covered the last bullet points there. Thanks. So just a past history, in staff's preliminary research, we took a look at what has the city presented to the voters before, and then also concurrently, what has the county presented to the voters before, at least in the last couple decades that we could find. In 2014, Measure S was presented to voters, and that was not passed. It was a 1% general sales tax measure. Other proposals, so outside the city, not city council directed at all. In 2016, Measure K was presented to county voters as a special tax measure for public safety. And then 2022, Measure F was presented to voters for emergency and fire at 0.5% sales tax measure. So at this point, I can go back to any slides for discussion's sake, but staff is just really opening up for council's discussion and then direction on where to go. What needs do we have? What type of amount of measure? What type of measure, general or process? Just thoughts at this point, because this could take a long time in order to even consider having this on if council were to choose to proceed. If through that process, council decided you wanted to present it to the voters, we would have to have ballot measure wording in by no later than August of 2024. So in between that time and now could be a lot of work. So just open for council discussion and direction.
All right. Yes, sir.
Chris, can you bring up the slide that showed the sales tax and the voter approval associated with each? This will work. So the point of clarification is the voter approval requirement shown up on the screen, that would be if the city council on its own puts a ballot measure on a ballot. So for a special tax that the council initiates, you'd have to have a 2/3 vote for approval. The big however is if it's a voter initiative for a special tax. In other words, if residents go out, collect signatures on a petition in order to get the special tax on a ballot, and they're able to collect the requisite number of signatures, that tax measure would only require a majority vote, even though it's special. So that's a very big exception with respect to special tax. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Ty, just a quick question on that. When we talk about 2/3 of voters, is it registered voters or actual voters?
The actual votes cast.
Yeah, actually.
Let's cast. Chris, I had a quick question on the. If you could go back to right there, the other cities when they increased, like the 1%, the 0.5%. Do we know if those were general taxes or special taxes, like a public safety tax, or as opposed to a general tax?
Offhand, I don't know for all of them. I know offhand, Tulare, Visalia, and Exeter are all general, but Visalia has one special too, so it could be a mix.
Could be a mix.
Yeah.
All right.
So where do we begin?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm definitely not a fan of taxes. But then I think this was the biggest shock when I assumed this office on the city council was how the taxes are divvied amongst from the state to the cities. And it's shocking to know that just even on the sales tax, about 87% of our sales tax goes to Sacramento and it doesn't stay here. And I mean, what we could do, if we had more local control of our tax dollars, what we could do with that money to better our roads, our police force, our fire, et cetera. And knowing that, and that's not, that's, in talking to the lobbyists, there's no way that the state will be changing any of that anytime soon. So we have what we have right before us. I'm just going to defer to my fellow council members first as I gather my thoughts because I have all these numbers and I want to be coherent. So are there any other questions from council? Councilwoman Sharp?
Just have a comment. In general, first of all, thank you for the presentation. appreciate understanding the full scope of options that we have. And it could well be that we end up doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. One thing I know for sure is that we've got a strong team as far as the council and the staff. And when we've got the horsepower on the staff is not the time to cut it back to just unilaterally say, no, we're not even going to try. We're not even going to ask the voters to weigh in on this, in my opinion. I do think it's time for us to try to catch up. I'm amazed that we get done what we get done with the revenues that we have. And like you know, no one's a fan of taxes, and everybody knows that costs are spiraling out of control in so many areas for our Hanford families and businesses, but they're also spiraling for our city too. And we want to have a good and nice city and not a crappy city. And so it costs money. So that's my comment.
Councilman Morrow?
All right. I think you guys know how I feel about this, but I'm not going to be unreasonable here. I will say for the utility user tax, I'm just going to go down a couple of different ones. Utility user tax, I don't feel comfortable with that, given the increases that we're going to have to be doing anyway over time. So I'll just keep that brief there. TOT, that one, I see where it's, that we put that on the visitors and stuff, but I also see that takes money out of visitors' budget, too, of what they could be spending in our town, and we're still generating revenue. So there's something indirect about that. So I'm just throwing my 2 cents from that. And then with the sales tax, so, the history of the nation, it was 1913 when we introduced sales tax, and I believe income tax around that point, and that's when government really blew up. And before that, nation depended largely on tariffs and then special short-term taxes, and even those didn't go very well, if anybody remembers history of the Whiskey Rebellion. But that all said, I see the hardships that we are going to be faced with. The only thing that I could probably be comfortable with is if we did this with a sunset measure in place. I understand that it creates more work somewhere down the line, but I do feel that gives the public the opportunity to evaluate how we're doing with their funds. I think that was a big pushback with Measure S. They didn't trust the council or the city at the time enough to pass that. I would think that maybe a sunset would be something that would help mitigate those reservations. So just something to
Just a point of clarification, that's a sunset on a sales tax, not a TOT tax.
Correct, yeah, okay. Sales tax. Just where I would be leaning on that. And I just think that would keep us honest and kind of slim as necessary without the big blow up that sales tax has done in the past for our government in other areas. And, just focusing on obviously keeping us sustainable as possible and trying to not get as much into the bloat, I guess.
Have you kind of entertained a 0.25%, 0.5% or is that something that?
Yeah, I making some notes on that, just looking at what we can see coming down the pipeline and kind of addressing where we would want according to our needs and what's important.
If I could chime in real quick on that there, part of today's goal, and I know in talking with councils at one-on-one, there was a lot of questions that were asked about like where will we go next and that sort of thing. And at the staff level, we didn't want to presuppose where this would go. Whatever direction council gives us tonight, as Chris mentioned, there's a pretty tight time frame from here to August. I know it wouldn't seem like it, but Fortunately, Chris is on his mid-cycle budget year, so he doesn't have a full budget to develop, so he can focus a lot more time to it. But what we would need to put together, and we've worked on it a little bit on the back end, and Chris put up on the page, is a detailed spending plan. I think that's the one thing that will gain consumer confidence. If the public is going to support a sales tax measure, they need to see from council and staff exactly where that funding would go. And it's my belief, in being part of a couple sales tax measures previously that were successful, that you present a plan that's reasonable and what our needs are, and you will back into that percentage. It may be 0.5%, it may be 0.75% or 1%. It could be, a mix of those. I understand Ms. Morrow's concern about the TOT tax, but if folks are going to come into our community and leave money here, I would much rather they leave 4% here than 1% in sales tax. And so it's a bigger portion of that when they're spending. I don't know about others. I know some of the council members said, when we travel and I go to a place, I never ask, wait, what's the TOT tax in this city? Should I be across the border in the neighboring city or county? Those are the things. And we've had this conversation. Yes, some cities do a utility users tax, but when you look at that list, it would be, as Chris said earlier, many cities do, not most cities do. And that's something that I think for us, because we have the water utility, the public may take umbrage to that we're creating a utility users tax on something that we already provide, and it does tend to blur the lines a little bit between those 218 enterprise funds and what we're saying is going to fund our general fund. We've been very clear that under law, we cannot use general fund money to cover the costs of utilities, and we can't use the utility ratepayers' revenue to fund general fund services. So it keeps it cleaner. So if you're asking for a staff recommendation specifically on that one, unless council really wants to use a multitude of funding sources, I would stay away from the utility user.
All right. Councilman Martinez.
Well, thank you very much. Gives me an insight.
Can I get you to talk into your mic?
Thank you. I appreciate it very much because it gives me an insight as to what we need to do as a city to provide the services that the community needs and wants. And thank you for taking that.
Vice Mayor Kyres.
Okay, I'm going to go back a couple months. And Chris, thank you for your presentation. I'm going to take us back in time a little bit. In my first year here on the council, I know when we were going through the budget and we had the capital improvement needs as well as our road repair needs. I want to say the number, depending on, like you said earlier, what's in it, what's been done, what hasn't been done, what's prioritized. We were somewhere looking in the neighborhood of $80 million in capital improvement projects and $55 to $57 million in road repairs. I moved here in Hanford in 1984. 39, be 40 years next year. And in 40 years, our community, and I'm not a tax guy either, but in 40 years, our community has not seen a sales tax increase since I've been here. And it goes to show up on the presentation that you made. And I think that's the critical thing we have to look at. I know our sister city or partner in Lemoore is, just in the same boat that we are. City Avenue, we've been at that number for so long, but I'm also, I ran my campaign on pro-growth, pro-development, and as you know, my public safety background, and I just look at the basic needs right now, what we need. And this is what I'm hearing from the community. I'm hearing that we need more police officers. When you talk to the police officers and you talk to staff, they need a facility. they need equipment, they need personnel. All those things come into play. And the same conversation that I've had with the fire chief as well. As our town continues to grow, in which it is going to continue to grow, let's make no mistake about it. The train is here, and we've talked about getting on the train or getting off the train, but we can't. It's here. It's time to go, and to go kind of with what Mario said. I'm not prepared to really talk about a percentage because I'd like to really know what it is. But I mean, if you just look at the basic side of it, at the 1%, generating off the slide, I want to say was 19 million a year potentially. We're talking about basically 7 years, 8 years from today, just to take care of the needs that we see coming and that are needed right now. And that's, that 140 million in improvements. So I would agree with my colleague here, Councilwoman Morrow. I'm not really see a need for utility user tax. The TOT tax, if we want to have that discussion, I mean, that gets paid by outside individuals that come to visit our community. If we want to look at doing some sort of thing there, but I guess where I'm going with this is listening to the constituents that I've talked to and listening to staff and speaking to the community. We all know there's a huge need there. And the burden is not going to get any less. It's been, and what I will say is for staff and for the prior councils, I mean, they've done an amazing job keeping Hanford going with limited resources and limited funding for so long. I will say we've gotten by. But that's not what I'm hearing from the community and the constituents. They don't want to just get by. And so, I just look at, I'll go back and kind of just use some of the old terminology. We're planting a seed for a tree that we may never sit under, but our grandkids and future families and stuff and the future community will. And if this takes 5-7 years to get going, I mean, I want nice streets. I don't think there's anybody out there in this community that says they want terrible streets. I guarantee you there's no one out in the community out there that says they don't want more law enforcement. This is a very pro-law enforcement community. It always has been. They know the burden that we've placed on public safety as a whole when I include fire in that as well, in the needs that are coming as we grow. It's just the needs are there. And so I'm the guy that made the comment about the TO2 tax. I go spend a night at a hotel. I don't look at it. I don't. I'm just being honest. If I'm going to stay at the Holiday Inn Express, I'm going to stay at the Holiday Inn Express. If I'm going to stay at the Hyatt Regency, I'm going to stay at the Hyatt Regency. It's not going to matter. If I need a hotel, I'm going to look for the best rate that I can find, and I'm going to get a hotel room because I need it. So I've never looked at what other communities' TOT taxes are. Me personally, I just never have. And I can understand Councilwoman Morrow's position on it. That's there are people that do look at that, and that's okay. I think that's something that's a great conversation to have, and to see what works best. But all in all, I mean, we know where we're at, and this is that tough conversation to have. And I just don't see a way out of it without a sales tax measure. I just don't. I don't know what that level is, but I know what I'd like to see the future of Hanford be for my kids and my grandkids and my future, and everyone's future. And I want nice roads. I want to feel like I'm safe. I want to know that You know, if God forbid my neighbor's house catches on fire, I've got a fire department that's going to be there and make sure my house doesn't go up with his. And all those things come into play, and I think the community, at least what I've listened to for the last year, is all supportive of that. We're going to have to do our work. You know, if that's what, we decide to move forward with, but I'm willing to carry that torch, or at least be a person carrying part of that torch. And I think I can very easily explain it to my constituents and to the community as why the needs are where they are and what we need to do to move forward. So I've taken up enough time.
Well, and I'll just add on to what you're saying too, where my position is, and it is coming from hearing outcry too from the public and the level of service and how they've seen decline in different areas and stuff, and we know that it's unfortunately going to get bad, just as what we have in the CIP that's not going to be able to get covered, or the deferred maintenance or anything like that.
Well, I'll support you. I like the idea. We've just the sunset. And that community advisory board. I think those things are important. To be honest with you, we as a council have an opportunity here to really build the trust back with the community on this by having their input, by listening to what's important to them. If they want some money set aside for parks or development or whatever, okay, tell us what you want, and we'll make that happen. So.
Community involvement.
Absolutely.
And I just, thank you. I'd like to, as Councilwoman Sharp mentioned, we do have a good team. We do have a good team of staff. We have a strong council here, and we are ready to carry this torch, because we no longer can kick a can down a road. We have to address, as Mr. Tavares said, the elephant in the room, and we have to move forward. And I ultimately think Hanford has to decide what the type of life Hanford wants. And it is putting it to the voters, and we see the numbers. We see the numbers and being able to communicate those numbers. And I think, being a numbers guy myself, it's very important. And I just want to thank, first of all, Chris, I want to thank you for the presentation, but also spending a couple hours with me going line by line during the budget time, understanding how every bit of the city's money is being used, because it was important for me in the campaign to have that public trust, that we are being good stewards of the taxes, the money that we receive from the sales tax and the property taxes, and we need to be a good steward. Going down the list that you provided, I agree. The parcel tax, I don't think we need to go in that direction, or the utility user tax in that direction, but also the business license tax. I don't see that should increase as well, because I see our downtown businesses paying double business license tax already, and I don't see that being a burden that we want to put on our businesses. The TOT tax, I could see putting that towards to the public and looking at that, and also the sales tax. How it is, I appreciate the numbers of 0.25% to 2%. I wouldn't even dare think about 2% as even a viable option. It's like off of the head, in my opinion. But inflation's rising, the increase in cost of goods and services, our employee costs. What type of level of service does the members of our community want? And that's, I want to put it in their hands, but I think some non-negotiables that I have, and in putting this forward, and I agree with, if a sales tax does go forward to the public, is there has to be a detailed spending plan, as our city manager has said. We need to let and communicate with the public, saying this is how we are going to spend every bit of the 0.5%, like say 9.6 million or 19.2 million or 4.8 million. This is how we're going to spend that money over a period of time. Also, I want to involve the community in an oversight, like an advisory or an oversight committees, where the community has a say in how those funds are spent. And it kind of takes the burden off the council in a sense of where they're being appropriate. We might have suggestions, but the community, that oversight committee, excuse me. And then I was really for a sunset, but then I've wavered on a sunset because what happens if we as a city are very used to this budget, then all of a sudden the sunset ends and it doesn't pass, we're down 10, 20 million in our budget, and that's going to even put a more of a burden on our community. So I can see the importance of a sunset in putting in the trust of the community and saying this is not going to be forever. But it's like kind of like the Chaffee Zoo tax, that they have it every 10 years. It's that 0.1%, but then they put it on a sunset for 10 years. And then 10 years later, they did what they said they were going to do. And I think whatever the council, who is going to manage this money of sorts, if we do pass a sales tax, we do what we say we are going to do, and we are on a timely manner. And the next time it went through, that sales tax measure passed by 80-20.
Right, and that's what I was going to add on to. Just it would be a testament to how well the city is doing, in the eyes of citizens. If we're thriving and we're doing well, then I would see that they're because of the example of Shavy, that people would continue to be in support of it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to continue, as always, I think it's our job to constantly continue to earn that trust from the community, that we are being good stewards of the tax dollars that we are currently giving, and hopefully, if a sales tax measure goes through, because as I said, 87% of our sales tax goes to the state of California. We are, and I don't think people know that. People don't know that. I didn't know that, up until about a year and a half ago. Didn't realize that sales tax money, we, in a 2-year budget cycle, we almost give $250 million to the state of California. That just generates from Hanford alone. My numbers might be a little bit shy, but it's a huge number, but people don't know that, and so they think that the 7.25% goes 100% to the city. And I think if we move forward with the sales tax, measure of some sort, it's that education, and letting people know currently how much the state takes and how much we actually get to keep. And so those are just my thoughts, my opinions. This is a huge elephant in the room, but we have to address it. We have to address it for our future of our city.
And I don't want to derail the conversation about the sales tax. I just want to throw in a placeholder to, at some point in this conversation, to go over CFD for Hidden Valley Park and really put it to that area and put it to rest. Do the citizens, which I feel in my area are really all about it, but we would be able to put that out to the ballot and be able to verify that and be able to put the burden of that cost on the local area to that park. So I'm just throwing that out there for discussion here.
And in addition to that, I just want to, what Ty mentioned about if this is a sales tax increase, I'd like the community and maybe the outreach of getting community to, kind of spearhead this, where we could, it would be a 50% plus one. And I think that's necessary, because if we don't have buy-in from the community on this, obviously we didn't do our jobs. I think we need to really get that outreach out there.
So we've had some conversation about it at the staff level, Brad and I, and Ty had some input, because with regards to a community facility district, and council's already given us some direction to pursue those for specific subdivisions, but given the proposed total size of Hidden Valley Park, that would qualify as a regional park. Because it's a regional park and regional draws extend beyond the borders, it would be reasonable to establish a community facility district that's citywide. And if that's the case, we could work with Wildan, who has experience. They're under contract with us, but they could develop what a CFD would look like. There's very specific requirements. In this particular case, we're getting towards the end of the conceptual design for Hidden Valley Park. We've done some research, so we'd have some numbers. The other side that we could do is, for instance, what would it cost to expand Hidden Valley Park for the full build-out with all of those amenities, and then what would the maintenance cost be for that and other parks within the city, and include it all in one community facility district that we could put to the voters. And that's something that we could bring back at a study session also, to include those elements.
And then after
determine what it would be.
After the build out of Hidden Valley, those fees would drop off.
Correct.
And then it would just be maintenance fees.
I have to get some clarification, but it's my understanding that under the CFDs, you have to basically build those improvements over 5 years. You can't carry it long term, like a 30-year term. So the parcel tax CFD would be at a certain level for the first 5 years until the cost of the park improvements fell off, and then it would just simply be the city's park maintenance for that park and the other parks that were included in the CFD.
Yeah, I know it's not, I would love to
Since
have
we're
that as a
talking
study
taxes,
session to learn more about that, because given the scenario that we're talking about, where else are we gonna find money to do that build out that ostensibly so many members of our community want?
And also just the grants that are out there are for new parks, and Brad probably can address this better than I, but it seems for new parks, not existing, like parks that we have.
Well, I know part of the discussion we had, even back with roads, I mean, and if you want to talk about hitting the CFD for Hidden Valley Park, what parks are another issue that the community is passionate about. I mean, they're the quality, the maintenance, and so that's really kind of comes back to true. What level, right? What level of quality of parks do we want to have? I mean, if you want to put it on the A, B, C, D, E, F scale, where do you want to be? Do you want A quality parks? If you want A quality parks, then that means hiring additional personnel and having the money and the resources to maintain them and, all that stuff. And all those are great discussions. So I think I'd like to see that maybe included during that time on what the cost might be for those different levels.
But also to piggyback off of what you were saying too, is when we're talking parks, are we talking about youth facilities as well? Like sports, is that all encompassing when we talk about a park, or is it just like a Lacey Park, a Hidden Valley Park? Or how does that,
Council would have to give direction on that.
Excuse me?
Council would have to give direction. The creation of the CFD would be very specific. Obviously, the development of Hidden Valley Park, but in terms of maintenance and improvements, all of that, it would be a couple of study sessions at least to decide what council wanted to include in that. And it may be as simple as saying, well, if you include X, Y, and Z, you're going to have a CFD assessment of X. If you really want to include everything, that may be a decision that council needs to give direction on as to what level of assessment are you willing to put upon the parcel owners in the community.
Is there any more input or questions or?
What next steps would council like to see?
I mean, I'll just throw. I mean, I think it's time. I think we're beyond time. It's overdue. I would request. I mean, my request is of staff to come back and give us a presentation. I'm going to defer to you as to the amount. I don't want to get in. I'm not prepared, or even at the level to advise what that necessary amount might be. It might be 0.5%, might be 3/4, might be 1. I don't know. I'm going to defer to you. All I would ask is when you're if the council's consensus is to move forward, that is, let's get the things taken care of. And we're talking roads, and we're talking, the public safety and all that stuff. I mean, I need to be able to see that.
And also, I think coming back to with like a detailed spending plan and having that, and what would it look?
The
What
case for giving. is
Yes,
the-
exactly. And if we did put a sunset, what would that look like if this, after the sunset ends, what ramifications will occur?
So,
Do we have a
List,
I was going
yeah.
to say, do we have a consensus?
Is there I guess, do we need to give you a consensus? Is that what you're?
I think I have enough direction. Mario, do you think we need anything else at this
No, I think we're good. I've been updating the future agenda items so we can include that on there. What I have is presentation to City Council regarding a potential sales tax measure and elements related to that process. And then I have another one, council discussion regarding the creation of a CFD to fund the expansion of Hidden Valley Park and citywide park maintenance. So those will be two separate study session items that we bring back to council.
okay.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Tavares.